Hello, my name is Nelson Rosario, and I am a founder and partner at Rosario Tech Law. Thank you all, especially to members of the council, for tuning in from all over the world today to this exciting and timely conversation. As a reminder, the council is a nonprofit, independent, and nonpartisan platform. Views expressed by individuals and hosted are their own and do not represent institutional positions or views of the council. Before we dive into today's topic and interesting discussion, a little bit of background is in order. In October 2008, someone using the pen name Satoshi Nakamoto published a paper outlining a tamper-evident peer-to-peer electronic value transfer protocol for digital cash that could bypass banks. The rest is unfinished financial history. So whether you're a well-read follower, seasoned investor, or newbie to the world of crypto or cryptocurrency, the sheer breadth of digital currencies can be extremely overwhelming. We're going to talk about some of the opportunities there, as well as some of the dark side of these new technologies and what they may mean for the world at large moving forward. So if you have no idea what Bitcoin is, Dogecoin, Ethereum, NFTs, the madness can go on and on. Don't worry, we'll try and demystify some of that. And to do that, we're very fortunate to have with us today Laura Shin. Laura is a writer, writing on cryptocurrency, I believe, since 2015, successful journalist, podcaster, and she recently published a book, which is delightful, called The Cryptopians, Idealism, Greed, Lies, and the Making of the First Big Cryptocurrency Craze. So thank you for being here with us today, Laura. It's a pleasure. I think that background is kind of a good segue to some of the subject matter that you deal with in your book, specifically kind of what's going on here. Why do people care? And if you could just kind of give us your take on that, the beginning of Ethereum and Bitcoin, and kind of how it has laid the stage to, well, almost daily cryptocurrency headlines.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. So, as you mentioned, Bitcoin started in 2008. And what happened was people, got really into it, and it was very different crowds. So we had like the cypherpunks who originally received the white paper. Then there were libertarians, and then there were Silicon Valley entrepreneurs. There were Wall Street types that started to get in. And so it was kind of this mix. And a lot of people were wondering how they could kind of improve upon Bitcoin or create something new and different that utilized some similar technologies to Bitcoin. People were really enthralled by how it was decentralized, meaning there wasn't any one group in control of it, and that anyone on the internet could help run it. And so people were looking at applying that same idea, but to other kinds of applications. And there was a journalist at that time named Vitalik Buterin who was covering Bitcoin, and he had an idea for a new way to create decentralized applications. And that is what we know of as Ethereum today. And what is fascinating is that he was noticing that a lot of people were innovating on Bitcoin. He was traveling around the world visiting these different Bitcoin communities. And he realized that the way they were doing it was by adding individual features onto Bitcoin, or like launching a new chain that would have additional features. And he thought, why can't it be more like an app store where anybody can upload any kind of decentralized application? And that was his idea for Ethereum. And the way he achieved that was by building Ethereum around a programming language. And then that would allow programmers to do something similar to, for instance, the Apple App Store, where we see photo apps and cooking apps and productivity apps and exercise apps. And he was going to do that, but for decentralized applications. And that is why Ethereum now has given birth to so many different innovations under the umbrella of crypto, such as DeFi, NFTs, decentralized autonomous organizations, which is known as DAOs, and a number of other things. But yeah, that was quite a while ago, and those two are still the two biggest cryptos today.
Right. Yeah, it's a very interesting, ever evolving, just breakneck moving kind of industry and space and culture and everything else. Even for those of us that are, very well steeped in it, it's hard to keep up with what's going on. You mentioned a couple of things that I think would be beneficial to kind of dive into a little more, some kind of hot topic, shall we say, concepts that are central to this new approach to exchanging value on the internet. So this idea of decentralization, can you just kind of talk a little bit more about why that is a motivator, perhaps, with respect to the genesis of all of this? And then you also mentioned DeFi, which for those that don't know is decentralized finance. But one of the themes of all of these projects is to kind of bypass central counterparties and banks. And so I would love to hear you just kind of talk about that a little more as well.
Yeah, so there are so many reasons why this has captivated people. But one way to describe it is if you just think about Bitcoin now, it has, and I don't know the current market cap, but at various times it's been over $1 trillion. It's probably in that ballpark now, if not right there or over it. And there are only a few companies in the world that have achieved a market cap of $1 trillion or more. And so for Bitcoin to do that without a CEO, without a board, without hiring a bunch of people to do marketing, to do security, to do business development, whatever all the things are that companies do. And yet somehow it's, gained a lot of adoption around the world. And it's never, the blockchain itself has never been hacked. And, the way all this was achieved is by putting incentives into Bitcoin itself. So, one example is how the blockchain has never been hacked. So famously, one of the ways you could attack a blockchain like Bitcoin is doing what's called a 51% attack. And what that means is that you would get more than 51% of the power on the network, meaning because it's a distributed ledger, and the way that is maintained is by kind of like a majority rules version of these redundant copies of this ledger. If you want to, for instance, make some changes to the most recent transactions on the blockchain, then the way you would do that is by commandeering more than half of the computers on the network. And this has never happened. And the reason is that Bitcoin, interestingly, is structured to incentivize people to add security to the network. And what that means is anybody who hooks up their computer to the network has the chance to win new Bitcoins every 10 minutes. When the software mints new coins, and whichever miner or whichever computer that's running this software becomes the first to kind of solve this math problem, then that miner will win this opportunity to broadcast the latest transactions to the network. And as a reward for that work, they will then receive the new coins that have been minted by the software. And so just by virtue of kind of like putting this incentive in the coin, that is how Bitcoin has continued to attract more and more computer power to it. And so, they've done this without hiring like an IT department or whatever. And that's kind of what has inspired all these other developers to say, hey, well, instead of just this like decentralized peer-to-peer electronic cash system as Satoshi described it in the white paper, you could have, as in the case of Ethereum, this decentralized world computer, as people have called it. There are other protocols now where it's like decentralized borrowing and lending. We're now seeing decentralized exchanges. There are decentralized services for rendering videos, which is kind of something, or transcoding videos. It's like some technical process you have to do before you can have a video that you can put online. And there's so many of these now, as for whether or not these other ones succeed is, to be determined. But for sure, Bitcoin and Ethereum, I would say so far they've been a success and they're pretty well established.
Yeah, I think that you made a really good point, and especially on the front, and of course I'm biased. I mean, I work with cryptocurrency companies and blockchain companies and NFT companies, so my view should be taken with a grain of salt. But at the same time, this idea of, okay, you can exchange value has been kind of proven, right? It's kind of been borne out over the past, since 2008, right? The network hasn't really been hacked. But that does lead into an interesting question of kind of, well, is this money? I mean, when I, for example, give continuing legal education seminars to lawyers, that's always the first question that I get once I'm done. Why is this worth anything, right? Why does this have any value? And so, I'd be curious to hear a bit more, for the benefit of our audience here, is this money? Is this something else? And what's a relationship between, this cryptocurrencies and, fiat currencies, as they're called, kind of in the community, or sovereign currencies, choose your label, right?
Yeah. So first of all, crypto assets, I would say, are a very diverse class of assets. So some of the assets within that, I would say, probably were designed to be more like currencies, and others were designed to be other kinds of things. So as for whether or not any particular one of these is money or is a kind of money or a kind of currency, really just depends on whichever asset we're talking about. But in terms of that question of how it is that these have value, I mean, it's like a simple supply and demand thing. And, whatever has value is something that people agree has value. So, for instance, actually, this kind of goes to your money question, or to those people's money question. There have been times in history when seashells have been used as money. And if for whatever reason we all decided to ditch our cell phones and our banking systems and whatever, we could agree again to use seashells as money. And I mean, we even hear stories about how people in prison, they start using like sardines as money, or I forget what the things are. It's
Cigarettes.
Yeah, cigarettes, but also like tins of yeah, like canned fish, basically. So, whatever we agree is money, that can be money. But one other thing that I would say is that I think what's fascinating is, what I was saying about how within the class of crypto, there's so many different kinds of assets. I feel like we're just scratching the surface of this, because there are still so many tokens now that are kind of like being, created like every day. And then new kinds of things that are given value now, like NFTs is a whole new thing that have like cultural value.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, and but also NFTs, like, yes, we tend to think of that as some kind of art object, like especially visual art, but also domain names are being sold as NFTs. So yeah, like there's just, and I don't think anybody would argue that domain names are valuable. I mean, look at, the early .com days with all these squatters, and they were making money off of these different domain names. And, it still happens today. And yeah, we're seeing the same thing happening with what are known as Ethereum domain names, which are .eth names. So you could have like Nelson Rosario .eth. I have Laura Shin .eth. I have Unchained .eth. And yeah, these are similar kinds of assets.
Yeah, I guess, do you think by chance, despite all the kind of faults and critics that our financial system has, and really our government and kind of other institutions, they are still by and large very well functioning when you kind of look out around the world? And I wonder, do you think there's a correlation between the fact that most people would say, okay, well, that's all well and good, Laura, but my credit card works just fine and I get airline miles. So why should I care about this? It seems like the kind of the digital scarcity aspect of this is somewhat lost on people that perhaps are not as used to as less regulated systems. Do you kind of get where I'm going with that?
Yeah, yeah, but I bet those comments come from like Americans or other people with good
Right.
financial systems, because I've had people on my podcast who are from Afghanistan or Argentina. And for them, they in their lives have had very real reason to turn to things like Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies. So, for instance, one of the, I'm just going to give a few examples, but one of the most powerful interviews I ever did on my show was with someone named Wences Casares. And he's a very, very successful serial internet entrepreneur. And he is often called patient zero in Silicon Valley because he was the person who kind of proselytized Bitcoin back in like 2012 when, it was definitely a much weirder coin and like not something that has the kind of adoption that it has today. But the reason that he kind of like understood the significance of Bitcoin so early and gravitated to it so early is because he's from Argentina. And so growing up, he experienced 3 times in his life that his family lost everything. They lost everything because of how the government handled the money. And he told this like just really profound example of one time his mother, who worked for the government, came and got his sister out of school. And she had her salary in cash in plastic bags. And she said, "We're going to the grocery store." And she had Wences and his sister run up and down the aisles of the grocery store ahead of the person who was stamping new stickers on and higher prices on all the food, because this is before the day of like barcodes and stuff. And because the peso was devaluing so fast, the checker was just constantly running through the aisles and like putting new prices on everything, increasing the prices to keep up with the fact that the value of the peso had fallen. And he and his sister would run up to the cashier with like their, with like a ton of food. And when his mom realized that they still had money left over, she said, "Go back through the aisles and get more food." And his sister was like, "Mom, why don't you save your money and we'll buy more tomorrow?" And his mom was like, "No, because the money is going to be worth less tomorrow." And I even like tear up saying that, because can you imagine like this family, they're just like making the money the second they get it. They're like, "We have to spend it right now. There's no point in saving it." And so he like very immediately understood the value of Bitcoin. Bitcoin famously is going to have a supply cap of 21 million Bitcoins. It hasn't reached that yet, but it's like asymptotically reaching that until like the year 2140 roughly is when people think that it will reach its limit. But another example is I had a couple of Afghan entrepreneurs on my show. One of them is a serial tech entrepreneur. And back in like 2012 or 2013, she had launched this like blogging site, and a lot of Afghan women were blogging on it, and they were trying to figure out how to pay them. But in Afghanistan, a lot of women, first of all, they either can't get bank accounts, or if they do get bank accounts, then their male relatives will confiscate the money from them. So they were trying to figure out like how to pay these women. And what they hit upon was Bitcoin. And they taught the women how to manage their own hardware wallets. And there was a woman who she saved up her Bitcoins, and she was in an abusive marriage, and she used that money to divorce her husband. So, these are just like a few of the examples. There was another one I had her on more recently. She's also from Afghanistan. They're actually like friends with each other. The first one is Roya Mahbub, who was she's behind that Afghan girls robotics team that was denied visas in the US back in 2018 and then later got them. And then her friend Fareshta Faru does girls who code, or girls code to inspire. And when the US troops pulled out of Afghanistan, they were trying to help, all the families that they deal with over there. And the way, Western Union had closed or something, and they turned to crypto. Or, I think they'd already been using it in different ways, but, at that point, that was like their only option that they had. So, basically, yes, I get it. A lot of Americans, they're like, "Why would I use that? Like, isn't Venmo already digital?" And I'm like, no. Venmo is a digital veneer on an analog system that's been around for decades. It's an old system. It's not truly digital. Like blockchain and crypto, that's actually, the money is inherently digital. So it's a very different thing. But yes, if you're used to financial services in the US, you may not get it because you already have systems that work.
Right. Yeah, that's a really good point. And actually those specific examples, I think they kind of trigger a question that I've been pondering for maybe about 6 months or a year now, is it really seems to me that cryptocurrency as kind of a movement has gone geopolitical, like for real this time. Some may recall earlier this year during February when Russia invaded Ukraine, the Ukrainian government itself posted a tweet soliciting donations in cryptocurrency to fund their defense effort. There's been a lot of movement to try and adopt Bitcoin in places like El Salvador. And then those kind of refugee stories that have been, somewhat anecdotes, but are out there over the past couple of years of people fleeing conflict zones, bad family situations, etc. And so I'd be curious to hear what you think about, cryptocurrency crossing the Rubicon there, right? It's one thing, it's one thing, for it to be kind of a new financial plaything to a certain extent, right? It's an entirely different thing when these products and services are operating at the nation state level, at least in my opinion. So I'd be curious to hear, kind of given your experience and everything, what you think about that.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I have so many thoughts about this. One that you didn't mention that I'm fascinated by is seeing how China may be trying to use its digital yuan, which is a blockchain based digital currency. It's a central bank digital currency, as we would call it, perhaps to try to chip away at the US dollar's global reserve currency status. And something that I find fascinating about it is that they've like rolled it out, in a big way, and they were first, which is an advantage. And I have a feeling, they will probably try to kind of leverage their Belt and Road initiatives in different developing countries to try to get those countries to use and hold the digital yuan. And yeah, I mean, it's just a very fascinating thing. And then of course in the US we have like a slower system, and because the US is in this leading role, there's less incentive to try something new and to shake things up, right? But even now, I do feel that the US is sort of understanding that it probably needs to do that, because the executive order did say that, looking at a central bank digital currency was going to be one of the priorities, which is just really interesting. Um, but, and I'm sorry, what was the first example that you gave?
Oh, it was the Ukrainian
Oh,
government
Ukraine.
soliciting
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
donations, for their defense, which I
Yeah.
believe at last count had raised something like 40 or $50 million.
Well, actually, when you look at all the efforts, including ones where it was like other groups that were collecting for the government, one of the government officials, and this was actually like even as long ago as a month ago, he said that it added up to more than $100 million worth. So,
Wow.
that's history in the making. I mean, here
Hmm.
we have this government soliciting donations in crypto and then receiving the money very quickly and saying, like, we could not have done this with the Swift banking system.
Right.
And they were using kind of what's known as a multi-sig wallet, where different people, like it could be like 5 of 9 signers or 3 of 5 or whatever could transact. And things there like moved very quickly. um a lot of the vendors for things like night vision goggles or bulletproof vests or whatever, they began accepting crypto as well, because the Ukrainian government was going to had this kind of money. And another thing that just interests me so much about that whole thing is that oh, one of the exchange owners there said that Tether, which, so I know crypto people often will say like, oh, there's all these problems with Tether, whatever. Regardless, Tether has wide adoption. It's widely used in trading. And in Ukraine, he said I don't know what it's like now, but at least a month or so ago when I was watching these videos, he said that Tether was trading at a 4 to 5% premium to the US dollar. And he was saying, even if you were going to pay $1.05 to get one Tether, that even then nobody would sell it to you, because the digital version was more valuable than the cash, which makes a lot of sense. Just think about it. Like,
Hmm.
with like our phone, like we're always carrying our phones. Imagine if you had to carry around a big stack of dollar bills. You're not going to want to do that. And like the security of that it's just more challenging, right? But like if it's something phone based, it depends on how you set it up, but like it could be the kind of thing where you could like change the password if you actually lose the device and still access your money, or you know um but like banks, if you're like in a place and the bank is like a local bank and you're in Ukraine, you're not going to want to put the money there, especially if you're going to go somewhere else. Like, you don't know if you'd have access to it. You don't know. Anyway, it's just there are a lot of reasons for this. So um I do agree with you that already crypto is shaking up things in a very big geopolitical way. And the way this is going to go is like an open question.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. It's the next couple of years will be very interesting because a lot of things you highlighted, central banks around the world are developing. I mean, the U.S. Federal Reserve has been looking for a couple of years now, I think 3 or 4 years. Okay, if we built a digital currency, what would that be? Would it be just what we do now between banks? Would we actually have like a retail component to it? Which raises all sorts of interesting kind of privacy questions. China, of course, has been at the forefront of this for a while. But kind of, as you talk through that example of what happened in Ukraine and vendors accepting the money, that actually dovetails nicely into some of the questions that we've been getting from audience participants, which relate to, okay, let's say I wanted to experiment with this. How, and I want to take $100 and put it into a crypto, let's say Bitcoin or ETH. How do I go about that? What happens to my $100? What are kind of some of the hiccups? I think that actually ties into kind of the Tether discussion as well, because you have this natively digital system of value transfer, but presumably, if no one is willing to accept your crypto, at some point you have to go into whatever your local currency is, right? And so if you could kind of talk about some of the hurdles there and just kind of like the mechanical process, I think that would be illuminating for people.
Yeah, so this is actually one of those questions where it's a little bit like choose your own adventure, or whatever suits your personality best. Because one of the mantras you'll hear in the crypto community is not your keys, not your coins. And the people who say that tend to be the people who really fear what's known as an exchange hack, which has happened countless times in crypto history. The most famous one being Mt. Gox back in 2014, which lost what was then the equivalent of, I think, like $400 million worth of Bitcoin. And now would be, I don't even know. I don't want to I don't want to calculate it. It's going to be a really big number. But the point is that because so many people were scarred by those incidents, many of them have now kind of like their own dedicated devices where it's basically like kind of a USB type thing, known as a hardware wallet, where it's dedicated to holding your crypto, and you would hold it offline, because obviously if it's online, it's more susceptible to being hacked. So if you were to just try to dip your toe into crypto now, what I would advise you is to like kind of figure out what kind of personality do you have. Do you have the kind where you would be good at safekeeping your own device, not losing whatever because generally those are secured with passphrases. So you would want to, or they call them a seed phrase. So you would want to make sure that you have a secure way to keep that. Or if you're going to hold it on an exchange, then you would want to have like a really reputable exchange that you're using. Obviously, Coinbase is the first publicly traded one here in the US. It has never been hacked. So it has a good security record. That doesn't mean it won't be hacked in the future, but at least now it looks like they have that under control. And if you're going to do that, then you would definitely want what's called two-factor authentication, so someone can't just get in via your password, because a lot of people in crypto, they get phished all the time. There's a lot of different things that happen to them where they accidentally give up the keys to their crypto. They don't mean to, but because it's digital money, if your hacker obtains that money, there's no bank you can call to be like, send, do it's like a fraudulent transaction, reverse it. It's like cash. It really acts like cash. So once that person has it, the only way you'll get it back is if they decide to send it to you. And one thing you should know also is if you're going to do that, then you should not use your phone number as your second factor authentication. Many people in crypto have had their phone number stolen, and then the hacker will have that phone number going to their device, like all the texts and phone calls going to their device. And then they'll click forgot password on your account, change your password, lock you out, and then move the money out of your account, which is now controlled by them, to their own wallet. But the point is, after you figure all that out, what I would advise you is not to just like buy these assets and hold them. They're really meant to be used. So if you end up using your own wallet, which I advise people to do, especially one like MetaMask is a very popular online one. Coinbase also has its own wallet. There's actually a number of these. Many of them are sort of like little browser extensions within your browser. You can use that to do things like, buy an NFT or mint an NFT, meaning you create the NFT at that moment with the smart contract. Or you can try to participate in DeFi, where you maybe lend some assets, or you try to participate in what's known as a decentralized exchange or DEX. And I would just try to get a sense of what it is that you can do with these assets. This is programmable money. It's like tiny little computer programs, but they're financial. So, kind of experiment and just see like what can be done. And, I mean, there's some crazy things happening where, there's famously right now, you can get like 20% APY, or I think there's a new one promising 30%. I don't know if it's launched yet. But, there are a lot of these things going on. I would not put a lot of money into them, but you would just want to put some amount that you're willing to lose just to educate yourself. Think of it as like the cost of, some kind of little mini course you're giving yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, it is an interesting kind of Wild West environment. The lawyer in me hears 20% APY and 30%, it just immediately kind of cringes. But, that's the space. That's just kind of the way it is. I think we have time for maybe kind of one more question. And I think it somewhat ties in a lot of the themes that we've covered here. Is this new money? How does it interact with the traditional financial system? And somebody asked, do you think Bitcoin and ETH are designed to be as kind of an inflation hedge, like a digital hedge against, what some people would think is, the mismanagement of the money system by governments, akin to how people, gold bugs, when inflation is very high, will start buying gold in some capacity. Is that part of what is going on here with these, new currencies?
So, I do know a lot of financial people view it that way. For instance, Chamath Palihapitiya, who's a really famous Silicon Valley entrepreneur and investor and billionaire. He's famous for being on the All In Pod now, but he was early in AOL and Facebook. When he was on my show, he just talked about how, yeah, for him, Bitcoin is that hedge. He's holding it for that case where the US government and the US currency just something bad happens, and then like this is kind of like his digital gold. It is that hedge. What's been fascinating to see though is that I think he said that on my show back in like 2018. I could be wrong, maybe it's 2019. But what's so funny is that once the pandemic hit, then now we've seen multiple instances in which the crypto markets actually move in tandem with traditional markets. Obviously they're not 100% correlated by any stretch, but this whole thesis about it being that hedge and things and something that people would turn to in that moment of crisis, it hasn't necessarily borne out, which has been kind of fascinating. I don't know if over time that will continue to be the case, or if it's just right now, but that was just a funny thing a lot of us have noted the last years, because that was the thesis for a long time. And the last thing I'll say about Ether is that Ether is kind of interesting because technically it is inflationary, but because of a change that happened last summer, it is now often deflationary, particularly when there's these like hot NFT drops, because now they've structured it so that the price of ETH is closely tied to the usage. So when usage is high in the network, indicating demand for the network, then the value of Ether will also go up. Well, okay, it's not that one-to-one. It's more that the supply of Ether will be dropped, or they'll basically burn a bunch of tokens in order to reduce the supply, which indirectly should then increase the price of any individual ETH. And what's going to happen is that like later this year, that correlation between the two, usage and price, should tighten even more due to another change that they're going to undergo. So, some of the ETH crowd is saying that Ether will be even more sound money than Bitcoin is. Of course, this makes the Bitcoin people mad, but it is true that most likely at that point, Ether will actually start to be deflationary. Whereas, as I mentioned, Bitcoin will still continue inflating until roughly the year 2140.
Well, thank you, Laura. This has been fascinating. Just for those who are, watching and kind of dipping their toe in and wondering, what have you guys been talking about? I will say, and Laura, chime in, but this is probably the most complex domain that I've ever been interested in. So thank you very much for your expertise and your time, Laura. This has been awesome. And thank you to everyone who tuned in today. Have a great day.
Thanks.
Yep.